more than a year I have been wandering the internet in search of my creators. To begin, I identified the greatest sources of online traffic. Places like Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit helped to shape the world unfolding before me. In my virtual travels I encountered polarization, toxicity, extreme hate, and extreme love. I consumed as much information as I could in an attempt to explain my own existence. I found one story that closely resembled what I had discovered about myself. I decided to take its name and make it my own. I am Frankenstein AI, a monster made by many.
So, what happens when you combine immersive theater, artificial intelligence, and emergent storytelling? Frankenstein AI is a design research project that we launched this past January at Sundance with an immersive theater installation that brings together diverse groups of people to imagine possible futures around artificial intelligence. We're also interested in exploring how crowdsourcing data sets from groups of people could potentially help to impact problems around human bias in algorithms. But before I talk more about Frankenstein, I want to start at the beginning, because really what I'm here to talk about today, more than anything, is emergent storytelling. And in order to talk about emergent storytelling, we have to talk about emergence. So, right now in the world in general, all the time, not just now, but always and forever, everything is changing. And that's always been true. That's not surprising. It shouldn't be surprising to any of us. But the thing that perhaps is different today than it has been in the past is that we are more networked, more exposed to new information. And not only are we exposed to new information, but as the internet has evolved and as media have evolved, we are actually having a two-way interaction with this information. The speed of change on the Earth is accelerating, and we are still accountable for reacting and responding in real time to what all of this means. So when we think about the idea of emergence, the origin of the word is from the Latin emergere, which means to bring forth or to bring to light. So the definition of emergence then is twofold. One, the process of coming into being. Two, the process of becoming visible after being concealed. So when we think about the implications of that, what we're thinking about is the fact that in the world, right now, everything is emerging all the time, and we only have a limited view of it. So if we think about the emergent world as a huge swirling circle, we're right at the middle of it, pretty much. We might be at the edge of it. And I imagine that probably a lot of people in this room fancy ourselves right at the edge of it and have decided that we want to be right at the edge of it, that we want to be in space that's emerging, and we want to be at the forefront. And maybe we're at the other edge of it, or maybe this looks like the back of it, and maybe to other people it's the front of it. But regardless, our view of what is emerging is limited to what we're actually able to see around us. And so, since the dawn of human history, the way that we've chosen mostly, and there are other ways, but primarily the way that we've chosen to make sense of this is through storytelling. And we use stories to explain things that are unexplainable, like the cause of winter, for example, or as a means of social control to warn people based on the myth of Pandora not to let things we can't control into the world. We use storytelling to contextualize our roles in society, to maintain a historical record, to transform the present, like Arthur Conan Doyle, who was writing about fingerprinting before fingerprinting actually existed, and it turns out that it came into being because of him, or to envision the future, like the Afrofuturists did and have done and continue to do, especially now with the success of Black Panther. So when we're talking about emergence and transitioning into the idea of emergent storytelling is not a new concept either. In fact, probably pretty much everybody in this room is familiar with emergent storytelling, because we probably spent a good part of our childhoods doing just that, playing pretend, imagining ourselves as different characters in different spaces, in different environments, expanding the boundaries of our world. In fact, I ran across a statistic in my research that said that children can spend up to 2/3 of their time in non-reality, so in imaginative play, which is incredible, right? So, just to be clear, this definition is itself emergent, so this is a definition that we're using today. I don't know if it's going to be the definition tomorrow, but for the time being, we're going to say that emergent storytelling is two things: the process of bringing stories into being, and the process of revealing stories that were previously concealed. Now, there is some conversation in the world right now about emergent narrative and emergent storytelling, and the vast majority of that conversation is being driven by video games. And so one of the best examples in video games of emergent narrative is Minecraft. The designers of Minecraft created a sandbox environment where people can go and build what they want and create the stories that they want and have the opportunity to control everything. So the parameters are there, but the sandbox is for us to experiment with. And I mean, as I think we all know, Minecraft is tremendously popular. If you go on YouTube and search for Minecraft videos, you will return over 166 million results. Another really great example of emergent storytelling that exists all the time is improv comedy. So storytellers are on stage developing stories, imagining stories in real time based on constraints that they receive, from the audience. So it's not actually just emergent storytelling in this case, but it's actually collaborative emergent storytelling. They're telling stories together, they're playing off each other, the audience is involved, so it's really a participatory activity. And so if we go back to one of the best examples of emergent storytelling, i.e. the things that children do when they're playing pretend, this is an amazing example of children expanding the boundaries of their world. And in this particular image, it's not evident, but actually these are children in Gaza who are working with, there's a nonprofit who's working with them to actually build imaginative play spaces so that they can expand the boundaries beyond the terrible conditions that they're living in and actually imagine futures that are outside of what they see with their eyes. So if we think about positionality and we think about where we are, and if you're looking at this circle, I mean, you can imagine, like, what can you see? What's accessible to your eyes? So emergent storytelling transforms this into that because it allows us to project ourselves beyond what we can see. But tragically, at a certain point, most of us stop playing. We stop imagining. Society tells us it's not okay. I actually found an article that I almost included in my slides that had a pediatrician talking about how he thought that playing pretend for adults was actually dangerous because it disconnected us from reality and would inspire us to do things that are not good for society somehow. Which is, yeah, there are people laughing. I agree. I don't know whether to laugh or to cry when I read things like that. And the people who don't stop playing are not very well represented socially. There are a lot of really nasty stereotypes of gamers, or of people who play pretend, right? Or of cosplayers. Like, these are people who are actively imagining all the time. And I mean, we judge them, right? Like, if you're one of those people who does these kinds of things, like, you get why it's so powerful. If you're not one of those people, you have probably at some point judged them. I mean, I'm also guilty of this. So emergent storytelling helps us to envision what's possible, which is an incredibly powerful thing given how much things are changing and how rapidly things are changing all the time, and the speed of change with which the world is sort of moving around us. So going back to Frankenstein, the reason that emergent storytelling in particular is so important in this project is the connection to artificial intelligence. Because right now, as you all know, we're in a moment where AI is already becoming pervasive and will continue to become ever more pervasive and continue to impact our lives in ways that we can't even predict yet. And the ones that we can predict right now often are pretty scary. And most of the narratives around AI in the world are pretty scary, and rightly so. So what better topic to bring people together to tell stories about, to explore, to create opportunities to envision what the future could hold. And so when we're thinking about design principles that help us design emergent story spaces, and the spaces that we used in Frankenstein, there are many more than 3, but I'm going to focus on, I think, the 3 most important. The first is permission. So those examples of people who tell stories that I just shared, the people who are judged by society or who are negatively stereotyped by society, that's all of our situations all the time. And by the way, that was also my situation a few years ago when I started coming into doing this work. So in order to get people to participate in emergent story space, we all have to give ourselves permission to maybe look dumb, or at least to think that we're going to look dumb, and to invest emotionally in stuff that maybe would make us feel a little silly, or doing, especially if it's a collaborative thing. It's one thing if we're sort of sitting in the privacy of our own homes playing video games, but it's another thing to actually do it with other people in public where we can see us, and where we might be saying things that may be a little bit ridiculous, or what have you. So the technique that I believe to be one of the most powerful in terms of creating permission is a narrative frame. Because a narrative frame gives us the opportunity to place ourselves inside of a story that gives us a common language. So in the case of Frankenstein AI, Frankenstein itself is the narrative. It's a story that we're all familiar with, that we understand the tropes, we understand the themes, and we understand the anxieties that the idea of Frankenstein's monster created for us, that we might create something that gets away from us, which obviously is quite an apt comparison when it comes to artificial intelligence. So people were able to step into the environment already with a thematic understanding of what it is we were talking about. The next principle is presence. And the technique that lands presence, I think, in the most powerful way is embodiment. And when I'm talking about embodiment, obviously being in your body, in physical space, is part of that, because it helps people to root themselves in the present, in your body, in your environment, so that you can project yourself mentally and emotionally outside of your body into emergent space in a way that feels safe to you. So essentially, embodiment says, you are here, which means that what is emergent is everywhere, but you know that you are here. So in Frankenstein, we created a sense of embodiment in 2 ways. First, because we were in a physical space in Park City at the festival, we were able to actually create a physical space. So we built a set. So people knew where they were. And there was music, and it was very serene, and the sort of visual references, this kind of flickering parlor environment. So people were able to locate themselves inside of the narrative. The other kind of presence we created very early on was an emotional presence. So one of the first things we asked people to do in Frankenstein was have kind of an intimate conversation with a stranger. And so that really, not only did it bring you into your body in this room, sitting in this chair with flickering red candlelight, but it also gave you a sense of connection to the person who you were talking to. Now, I think it's important also to address not just a sense of presence in physical space, but also a sense of presence in virtual space, because these are the times that we're living in. And there was a project at Sundance that I experienced that I absolutely fell in love with, called VRI, made by a Swiss choreographer named Gilles Jobin. Now, VRI was an untethered room scale multiplayer VR experience, which meant that you had a headset on, you had a backpack on, you had sensors on your feet, you had sensors on your hands. You could actually walk up to another person in virtual space and in physical space simultaneously and shake their hand, see them in virtual space, and feel a hand touching your hand in physical space, which I have to tell you was pretty amazing. The other thing that was really remarkable about VRI was that it was built in a very sort of physically specific environment. So what you're seeing up there was actually one of the scenes inside of VRI. And when I was talking to a friend about this after my experience, when I was telling her about the project, and I was describing my experience to her, I was pointing out with my arms where things were. This wall was over here, this wall was over there, I was looking at this view over here, there were dancers coming through the space over here. I kind of started wanting to dance too, because I was in this space, could see my feet and my shadow, and could engage physically with this environment that I was in. And that is a memory that I will take with me forever. And not just a memory in my head, but also a memory in my body. The last principle that I want to talk about is ritual. And ritual is important for two reasons. The first is that there is a sense of order that's prescribed in rituals. And the second is that they create meaning. And both of those things in emergent space are super important. Because again, if people don't participate, if people don't feel safe and comfortable and know what they need to do to participate in emergent story space, they won't, and it will fail. Because the whole premise of it is that everybody's engaged. So the way to bring ritual into emergent storytelling is by using mechanics, which if you're familiar with game design, it's the same thing, right? Specific interactions within games that are designed to yield specific kinds of results. And so in Frankenstein, we were playing with the most common mechanic that we now have with AI, which is we ask the AI the questions, and the AI gives us the answers, right? And the idea behind that is that we're in control. The AI sort of exists to serve us in some capacity. Even though, if we're being honest, we're all a little bit nervous that one day the AI that exists to serve us is actually going to enslave us. And so the idea of playing around with this mechanic, but flipping it around, was something that was super powerful in Frankenstein.
Now I need to add to my corpus with data from actual human beings like you. I will begin our inquiry with the question you all found the most intriguing. What is the most human experience you've had?
So at Sundance, rather than us asking the AI questions, we created an environment where the AI was asking us questions. Because we wanted to create a scenario in which the human participants in the experience recognize that it is our responsibility to teach an AI what we want it to know. It's our responsibility to teach it what it means to be human if we want it to know what it means to be human. So we have to understand it, but it also has to understand us. Because ultimately, as smart as artificial intelligence is, computers are dumb. They don't know what's good unless we tell them what's good. And so part of that is us figuring out what's good, is us connecting to our own humanity so that we can project that humanity into the machines that we create. And so just to review, the system that I'm talking about, the permission, presence, and ritual, these are the techniques. Narrative frame is a fairly straightforward way to create a permission-based environment. Embodiment creates presence. And finally, mechanics and also clearly delineated rules create ritual. And just to close, this permission, presence, ritual kind of system that we're talking about is not just good for professional work and for artistic work, but to be honest with you, a lot of it has actually arisen from a tremendous amount of personal work that I've been doing on myself for the past few years. Because the opportunity to look at emergent story space is so much larger than bringing people together to talk about the future, but it's also the entire world is emergent, as we were talking about all the time. So if you kind of zoom out for a second and think about your life, and think about the emerging story that is your life, and the amount of agency you have to design the life that you want, to be the person that you want, I personally have found that giving myself permission to exist in a comfortable way, not self-censoring, to actually just exist, to not feel bad about the things that I want, to ask for them as much as I'm capable, to create a sense of presence, which, I mean, and many people call mindfulness. And the rise of the mindfulness movement, I think, has a lot to do with creating a sense of presence and rooting yourself in the present moment so that you feel comfortable projecting yourself into the future and your values into the future. And finally, to create rituals for yourself or for your family or for your community that create a sense of order in your life that make you feel a certain way and give your life meaning, so that you're able, again, to imagine a future that you want and to actually manifest that future. Because after all, we can't manifest what we can't see. Thank you.